أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamualaikum. Good morning. Good morning. Before I forget, actually there is one of the principles of science communication I can share with you, which is when you want to start doing your science communication, you want to put yourself in a state, a psychological state of service. So you can get there in multiple ways. So the way I did that is by reciting this like a classic Islamic prayer. So what's included in that prayer is actually helping me to enter the space of service, right? So because the first line of it goes, please protect me from evil. Please protect me from evil. So from the evil from my own heart. So that, because words are important, words are powerful, they cause harm to other people. And also evil is associated with falsehood. So when you do science communication, you want to make sure that you don't spread falsehood. So that's the first thing that I try to remind myself. And then the second line goes like in the name of God. God is like the antithesis of evil. So if evil is associated with falsehood, then the notion of God is associated with truth. So even there, I'm already reminding myself that this science communication is an important thing. Right? You're trying to take the audience away from falsehood and evil to truth and the truth. Right? And then the next line goes, God visual subject. God has multiple meanings. One of them that I like is educator. So I'm asking, why educator? Please expand my chest. Please expand my thought. Please expand my mind. Why? Because when you do science communication, especially when you start speaking to the public, there's like a force of constriction. You feel like everyone's looking at me, I'm speaking around people. So one of the manifestation of that is you start to rush your communication. The reason you want to rush it because you're subconsciously trying to finish it as soon as possible. I need to get this done, so that you can sit there, hold it, and then you start to feel expansion here. My presentation is done. I don't have to worry about this anymore. Right? But you want to drag that sense of expansion to the early stage of your presentation. And then the next line goes, why sit down? Please make the task easy for me. So what that means is you acknowledge that science communication is difficult. That's why you want to ask it to be easy. So when you accept the fact that science communication is difficult, I find that I become more forgiving of my mistakes. Because if I think, this is something easy, when you make mistakes, it starts to be, how can I make that mistake? But when you accept that science communication is something complicated, something difficult, then if you don't do this perfectly, you feel like, this is fun. I'm learning from my mistakes. Right? And then the next line goes, you have that words 107. So basically the next line goes, please untie the knot in my tongue. So there's a very Arabic poetic way of saying, please help me to speak clearly. The reason for that is because when you do science presentation, there'll be lots of motivation inside you that's trying to come out. So one of them that's most common will be one to kind of show off how smart I am when you speak something. Right? So in order for you to kind of replace that, is to focus on, my goal here is trying to be as clear as possible to my audience. So it doesn't matter whether I look good or I look silly, if I can be clear, then it will be helpful for my audience. And then the last line explains why that is important, which is your conclusion. To help, please make my audience understand. Understanding is important for science communication. Because if you, I think most of the time when you do science communication, you rarely talk about something controversial. But from time to time, that might be the case. You might talk about, for example, is it moral for governments to force people to do vaccination? Or is it moral for parents to not giving vaccination to their children? Or how do you compare the theory of evolution between microorganisms and human evolution. So those are kind of emotionally charged topics that you might touch at some point in your communication career. So if your goal is just to help the other person to understand, then you don't have to worry about, it's okay if they don't agree with you. What's important is they understand something that they didn't understand before. Right? So that's how I start my science communication, my presentation. So I want to put myself in the state of service. And then you can start meeting your audience, like Assalamu alaikum, good morning. And then the next thing that you want to do is you try to identify the first thing that you feel in the moment. So usually you have like a negative feelings, negative ideas, and you have something positive. You just go to the positive one and pick one. That right now I feel grateful that so many of you are here. Right? And I'm also grateful for people who come from overseas, who are from East Asia, from Japan. Especially for those who never heard me doing lectures on science communication in the field, or who've never been my student. Can I check how many of you actually have been my students? You raise a hand, like immunology, microbiology, philosophy of science. Some of you. That's a good sign. What that means is you have positive enough experience in my teaching, in my science communication, that you want to come here and to learn how I do it. Right? Right. And for those who have never learned from me before, this is an act of faith. So think about this. We always hear people talking about leap of faith. Leap of faith is something like a big decision that you make in order to make your life better. A leap of faith is like you study in one field and then you want to change your career to another field. You don't know whether that change will make your life better. You just have faith. And even if you think about it personally, people do leap of faith all the time. That getting married is a leap of faith. Because even though you feel like you know the other person now, you love him, you love her now, you have no idea whether you're going to grow together or are you going to grow apart 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So that's the idea of leap of faith. But what I find people usually underestimate is the idea of steps of faith. A step of faith is something small, a decision that you make that doesn't risk that much, that you do in order to improve the trajectory of your future. So for example, coming here, there's a risk associated with it. You know what the risk is? The risk is you learn nothing from this whole morning. You waste a couple of hours, you learn nothing from it, you learn nothing from your Yasmin. So it's a small risk. Even that small risk, a lot of people go on to take. So the fact that you've been here, you're taking that risk. You're taking that steps of faith because you want to get better at science communication. So in that sense, you and I are alike because this is something that I want to do all the time. I'm taking these small steps of faith to improve myself as a science communicator so I can be a better science educator. Because I don't come from like a family of scientists. My mom is a homemaker, a full-time homemaker. She served her family throughout her life. And my father, he's retired now, but he used to work as a public phone technician. So in the past, you have these public phones, and then you have to take shillings, you have to put money to that public phone, and then you could call. You have to remember people's phone number. Oh my God, it's so difficult. So they didn't go to universities. We didn't speak science back home. And as you can sense that I don't come from a rich family who speaks English during dinner. So science communication doesn't come natural. It's not something I grew up with. And science communication in English is definitely not something that I grew up with. And I have lots of bad experience trying to practice science communication, especially when I studied in Australia. Because in Malaysia, when you can't explain something in English, you can use what linguists call code switching. So code switching is you try to explain something in English, you get stuck, you switch to your primary language, Mandarin or Malay. And then when you feel comfortable again, you can start talking English, Malay, English, Malay. So we call that code switching. But when you go overseas,
when you're interacting with native English speakers, you don't have that option anymore. If you get stuck trying to explain something in English, you just get stuck there. And that can become it can become painful, like a bad experience for you. I remember this one time, I was having a conversation with like this British old person, British gentleman. So he's a UK citizen who works in Australia. So I tried to explain what I was doing for my PhD. Basically, that's a science communication, right? You try to explain something to someone. And I remember so many times he kept saying to me like, I don't understand, I don't understand, I don't understand. And then that conversation ended really awkwardly. Like I just asked to excuse myself and just walk back from where I work. And I remember on that trip back to my workplace, I felt so sad, so frustrated. Like I feel like, it was so stupid, it's so worthless. Now, for you girls, you might think that is kind of an exaggeration. But I'm telling you something. For men, our masculine identity is very associated with how we view our strength and our intelligence. So when you feel really stupid, it hurts men more than it hurts women. The feminine version of that would be when people criticize how you look. Right? When you go into a situation, someone implies that you're fat. If that happens to a man, it will be like, we get hurt, but okay, I'll just need to go easy on my muscle and then I eat less and something, yes? So, and then they move on. But for women, when that happens, it hurts deeper. Don't you agree? Right? So for men, the sense of being stupid can really hurt us. Right? So something that you want to help. So that is just one of many experiences that I have related to my science communication. Of course, there are other experiences. For example, I try to do lab presentations, and then the audience, the person in front of me, I can see that they don't understand it, but they try to be kind. They be like, yes, I know what you're talking about. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? So that bad experience has motivated me to look into how I can communicate much more effectively. And that was like, it took me like a journey for like 10, 15 years from back then all the way to today. Where today I'm comfortable enough to teach one of the most difficult biomedical subjects, which is immunology. Right? And it gets to a point where my colleagues at the PhD in this faculty, they keep encouraging me, Irwan, can you do these science communication sessions, science communication workshops in the future? Now I'm telling you all of that not to motivate you. I'm not saying that, well, it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter what your primary language is. You can just put a bit of effort, and then you can be really great at science communication. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case, especially when I look into the literature related to L2 fluency. L2 means the second language fluency. So L1 is the primary language. So for many of us in Malaysia, L2 will be English, and L1 will be like Mandarin or your Malay language. And so it is difficult there is a lot of interference that you get from L1 to L2 language. So when you feel like trying to present something in English is hard, it's natural, it's not wrong, there's nothing wrong with you. It is like that for most of the population. Okay? So I know that sounds kind of demotivating, but I'm not here as a motivational speaker. I'm here as a science educator. So my tendency is just to explain the scientific literature the best that I can, even if it is demotivating. But my background actually should give you some hope, because despite my disadvantages, I can get this good. What that means is, if you have a better advantages than I did when I was younger, you can be better than me today. If your family have scientists, if your parents go to universities, if you speak English at home, then you actually are starting from a much better position than I was in the past. And even if you share my disadvantages, even if your family doesn't speak English at home, if you don't speak about science at home, the fact that you've been here can be like an accelerator to your improving your science communication skills, because you're starting to pay attention to this much earlier than I did. I needed to get to a very bad place before I started paying attention. One of the mistakes that I made in terms of science communication is when I assumed that writing and speaking use the same neural pathways. Basically, if I can write really well, it means I can speak really well. So that's a mistake that I made that I didn't know. Because I was quite good in writing. So when I went to Australia, I thought, just you can write, you can actually speak. It's totally wrong. So the fact that you're starting here is good because we have more time for you to develop that skill. So by the time you get to my age, you'll be a much better science communicator than I am today. So that's very hopeful, right? So, and also when you attend sharing sessions like this or workshops that we are going to be working to organize later, that will kind of make things faster. Your progress will be much faster than you didn't have to go through the mud that I did because I need to learn it by myself. So that's one of the reasons why we have this session. This session actually is part of a larger project that I'm envisioning. So I'm not thinking Science Speaks as this one session. I'm thinking of Science Speaks as a large project, long-term project. So I'm trying to put in motion that we can create like a lifelong learning community where we help each other to improve our science communication and maybe other aspects of our learning. And then when you become good at that, maybe we can think about how we can apply those skills to serve the society, doing something valuable. For example, we can, organize a workshop to serve companies that want to have their staff trained in professional communication. And I can get some of you to be part of my training team. And then the company can pay for the workshop, and some of the money can go to you, and we can make this like a self-sustaining movement, right? So that's the long-term vision that I have in mind. But I understand that not everyone would be interested to spend so much time and energy and money in order to become highly trained professionals in science communication. So for the rest of you, I still want to do something of an immediate value, something that you can take away and you can use it in your daily life, in your career straight away. I've given some of that already, so I've shared with you the principle of service so that you become more calm when you do presentation because you try to serve other people. And another one that I mentioned just now is about how your family backgrounds and your language background can actually interfere with your ability to do science communication. So when you see native English speakers can communicate better than you don't feel like there's something wrong with it. It's just the nature of our psychology. And at the same time, it's a learnable skills. Because it's a learnable skills, we can become much better than we can today. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes until like 11 and something, and I'm going to let go to Yasmin to share the experience, very practical, very useful techniques to improve your science presentation. And then after that, we do put Yasmin arguments at the front, and we can have a Q&A session so we can help you directly of the personal challenges that you have with your science communication. Right? All right, next thing, I think at this point I should try to clarify what we mean by science communication. How many of you kind of have a good idea the difference between science communication and scientific communication? Scientific communication is the one that you do when you try to present your lab results to your supervisors and when you try to write scientific articles for academic journals. So those are scientific communication. So do you understand the difference between scientific communication and science communication? How many of you feel like you kind of know what that is? Most of you don't, you just do it. So, I've thought about what science communication is, and I've thought about how to explain it. So that's another principle for your science presentation. What you do when you get a topic, when you choose a topic, what you want to do is you spend a couple of hours trying to think about that topic and what it means to you. You explore what it means to you personally. You know why we do that? When you do that, you immerse yourself in that idea. And that will create like a mental space in your mind that will gravitate, that will pull examples, facts, analogies, ideas from your database, from your experience, from your knowledge outside of that specific field. Right? So for example, if I want to talk about immunology, if I'm in that space, I can get examples and analogies and ideas that come from psychology, it comes from philosophy, it comes from theology, it comes from my own experience, my relationships, everything can go there. When you manage to do that, your science presentations become much more engaging, much more alive. Right? Okay, so that's why you want to do it. The way you do that for a topic is you can explore it in at least 3 dimensions. You want to explore the topic lexically, through a language. So what does the topic mean to you as a user of that language? So it's a lexical exploration. Second one is technical exploration. So technical exploration is how do specialists in that field conceptualize that topic? So you want to talk about microbiology, think about what specialists in microbiology think about that particular topic. So there's a scientific or technical exploration. The third exploration is philosophical exploration. This is when you think about what's the logical foundation of this topic and what is the implication of this subject to people outside of that specialized field. How does it affect society? How does it affect people in their daily lives? Right? So this is what you do. So in terms of science communication, oh, by the way, once you do that analysis, you don't have to like explain everything that you have analyzed for hours and hours, because that would just be too much for the audience. What you do, you process all of those analyses as a homework, you get it through your mind, and you try to come up with like a simplified version of it that the person can understand. So this is what I come up with science communication. Science communication is when you talk to people outside the specialized field. Science communication is when you talk to people outside the specialized field. So we can contrast that with scientific communication. With scientific communication, you talk to people inside the specialized field. Your supervisor, for example. Right. So in the past, I thought that science communication is just about scientists trying to explain science to non-scientists. So that's all I think about. But when I think about it carefully, the notion of science communication is much more broad than that. It can also involve scientists speaking to another scientist. I'll give you an example. For example, my PhD and Dr. Yasmin's PhD, we work in viruses a bit, right? So when I'm trying to have a conversation with Dr. Yasmin about viruses, we can do a bit of scientific communication. We can get away with using technical jargons, we can be more precise and have a much more complicated discussion. However, my PhD leans towards immunology. Her PhD leans towards more like a biosensor technology. So when I try to communicate about immunology to Dr. Yasmin, but when she tries to talk about biosensor technology to me, we have to use principles of science communication, even though both of us are scientists. So once I realized that, I realized that science communication thing is much more useful for people than I thought. Because not everyone wants to go on TV and talk to the public about their sciences. But you have to communicate your sciences to other scientists at some point in your career. So by improving your science communication skill, you can enhance that adaptability. You can learn to customize your linguistic repertoire, your language resources to explain your science to different scientists outside of your specialized field. And that will make you so valuable as a scientist in the job market. Right? And that's from the aspect of the career. Personally, the process of improving your science communication have taught me at least two things. Number one, he teaches me communication. Because trying to break down complicated subjects and concepts into pieces that is accessible to someone who doesn't have my training is tiring sometimes. So I teach myself to be patient in that process. And secondly, it actually helps clarify my understanding of the subject. So one of the things that you can try to know whether you understand the subjects that you study is to try to explain it to someone who hasn't studied that subject as well. You'll find that after you've done that, your understanding of the subject becomes more clear. Right? So how do we do this? The first thing, there are many ways of doing science communication. One of the important principles is you do what's called audience analysis. So you can do audience analysis in different stages. You can do pre-engagement before your science presentation. So you can ask yourself, who am I talking to? You can ask yourself, what do they need with a presentation? And you can ask yourself, how can I serve those needs? An example of that is the registration form that I give you. So I ask you your details so I can contact you, and also I give like a short survey down there in order to get an idea about what is important for my audience for this presentation. You can also do audience analysis during the presentation. I must warn you, this is something that a little bit advanced, because as a beginner, what you experience is, I'm already paying so much attention to what I need to speak. I don't have enough conscious resources to actually pay attention to individuals in my audience. So that's fine. So in the beginning, you can do a little of that and focus more on how you're going to present your ideas. But as you get older, as you get more experience, you want to integrate real-time audience analysis in your science presentation. So the way you do that is you look at individual instead of just scanning the whole room like that. You try to look at individual. Not too long, you just you're going to fake your audience out. So you just look at the person a couple seconds, look at the person a couple seconds, right? So what you're looking for is a number of things. You can look at whether they understand what you're talking about. Because if they don't understand, even when they don't really, it's subconscious. I feel like they'll be like a furrow brown. So you can notice that. When you notice that, you can try to explain in other ways. Or you can look at whether they're happy, the energy that they feel. You can look at whether they make eye contact with you. The eye contact thing is interesting because in the past I thought that when someone don't make eye contact with you, it means that they're not listening to you. And I look at it, that's not necessarily the case. Because what happens is, when you're presenting something complex, or presenting something like a scientific subject that's very complicated, what happens to human beings is, we try to prioritize our attention resources. Instead of splitting our attention resources to vision and audition, we would just naturally let it down. And then we try to focus more attention to our audition, our hearing, so they can try to understand what's being said. So when you do science speak, when you do science communication, if the audience don't look at your eyes, don't feel discouraged. They might just try to figure out what you have been saying so far. Right? It's a processing mechanism. Okay, so once you get the audience analysis, during the real-time, when you're doing the real-time analysis of your audience, another thing that you will notice is what are the things that you say that gets a lot of reaction, lots of responses. And then you want to try to expand that so that they have a good experience. I give an example. Something that surprised me. I remember giving this talk to school children. And it's about introducing microorganisms to the children. So I tried to include some popular references. I use examples from Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. And then I use another example from the Wizarding World universe, the Harry Potter universe. I thought, during preparation, that the MCU example will get more response from the children because it's more current. Harry Potter movies came out like 20 years ago. So I thought they have no idea what I was talking about. But during the presentation, I find that they're much more excited. You can see that the energy is that, when I mention the mentors. So I use the mentors as an analogy for predatory bacteria, like vampire focus. Because the mentors, what they do, right? They suck the soul of the victim, and predatory bacteria like vampire focus, they suck the content of your cells. So I just try to make that connection, right? So something that can excite you. So when you notice that during your real-time audience analysis, when you see that they're excited about it, what you want to do is you want to linger there in your. You try to think about what else I can say in place, so that they have a much stronger positive experience of your talk. If you say something, like a joke or something that you think is funny, but the audience will be like, what you do is you move on. Right? You don't try to push it to something that people love. You don't do that, just move on. So that's the value of audience analysis. So that when you finish your presentation, they feel, I don't remember everything that Dr. Irwan says, but it's a very good presentation. I don't know why. It's just a very good presentation. Right? So this is what you want to do. And then you can also do post-engagement analysis. So this is something that you can do after your presentation. You can do the qualitative approach, basically just meet the person in front of you, your audience, and have a conversation with them. When you do this, the advantage of it, you're going to get a much more personal, much more elaborate sense of how they experience your science communication. Right? The downside is a lot of people are very kind, very nice. So you can get the positive feedback that you can take and you can replicate in the next science communication or science presentation, but you rarely get criticism, something that you need to fix for your science communication, which is fine, I guess. But in order to get that, a better way is try to give them like a written feedback. I should give a post-presentation survey later today to all of you. So the advantage of that is when it's written, and especially if you allow them to be anonymous, they are more willing to tell something that can help you get better, criticism. Rarely that they're going to stand in front of you. Well, Dr. Irwan, your presentation is just rubbish. I have no idea what you said half of the time. They're not going to do that. They will type that. The downside of doing this questionnaire, however, is that it's too objective, it's less subjective. Because some people think when they speak, some people think when they write. But so for people who think by speaking, they won't be as clear when they try to write something about the important stuff. It's something I experience with my wife. Like I'm a more writing person. If I need to figure out something, I have to write. But when Wida needs to think about something, she will talk, in order to clarify the idea herself. Right? So when you do post-engagement survey, the downside is you might not get a good subjective opinion about your presentation. I know, as science students, we think about subjectivity as it has a negative connotation. Why do you want to know a subjective observation? Subjective is like something arbitrary, something that is not accurate. We want objective observation. So that's not always the case. There will be lots of contexts where subjectivity is much more valuable than objective observation. I didn't learn that when I was doing my PhD. I learned that when I was coaching my wife for her master's in psychology. Because one of the things that she had to work on is a method called IPA. IPA is interpretative phenomenological analysis, where you take into account deeply the subjective experience of someone. So my point is, if you want to do science communication well, don't underestimate the value of the subjective experience that you audience. Right? Okay. So once you get this audience analysis, what you can also think about what are the factors that you want to consider when you talk to them. So from my experience, I try to think about at least two things. Number one is what we call educational variance. So educational variance is like a basic idea that we have in statistics, right? So you have your y-axis and you have your x-axis. I want to make sure people at home can see it. Okay, good. So let's say this is your mean value. Okay. So when you have a small variance, your data will distributed like this. So you're almost at like in the middle. So your data is somewhere in here. When you have a large variance, your data will look like this. Right? It's much more widespread. So that's the basic idea of variance. So when you try to give a science communication or science presentation, you want to think about the educational variance among your audience. I give an example. I've been invited to speak for Form 5 students from a boarding school. So in that situation, most of my audience will be like 70-year-old student who study science in secondary school. So the variance, the differences between each member of the audience will be very smaller variance. On the other hand, I have been invited to talk about biological sciences in like a Kalam presentation where the audience come from natural science, social science, theology. So that has a wider dispersion, wider differences in the way people are educated. So that's what I mean by educational variance. So why do you want to think about that? Because when you talk to a group with a smaller variance, your language can be more targeted. You can just talk something that 70-year-old or younger people understand. You can talk about movies, you can talk about TV series, right? But when you have a big audience, people from in their 60s, professors from in their 60s, theologians who might even watch TV, they're so religious, right? They're so very good. And then, so you have to be careful about the language that you use. You need to make sure that the language is inclusive. And when you give example, you want your example to be, it's ideal, example can be universal. So you give one example that everyone can understand, which is, in my experience, quite difficult to find ones like that. Or what you can do is, you try to give multiple examples of the same concept, and one you constantly targeted at these people. And another one you give to a subset of these people. So that's why I want to pay attention to that communication variance. Another important thing, second thing that I would usually think about is when I come across this idea of knowledge gap hypothesis. Knowledge gap hypothesis is the idea that people from a richer area, people who are more exposed to the latest technology, they will have more access to knowledge much faster than people from a lower socioeconomic status. So there's a difference in knowledge between people from a higher socioeconomic status, rich people, urban area, high-tech area, compared to people from the rural area, lower socioeconomic status. So from my experience, when you want to talk to people from the higher socioeconomic status, I can get away with giving the more technological examples or analogies. When I want to talk to people from a lower SES, I need to make sure that my example is much more grounded in daily experience. The example must be more natural, must be more environmental. Right? I give an example. So let's say you want to talk about how amazing CRISPR is. Right? So you can first explain, CRISPR is about you have an RNA guide and you give stanza for Cas9 and you can use that to edit genes. And then you can give, if you're talking to a higher socioeconomic status audience, you can say that, so CRISPR is like when you have these UX features on your web design, like you use the experience of your web design, you can actually change that by going to the code and you can replace and edit the code. When you change that behind the scene, your experience of using that web will be much different. So that is what we can do with our genes now. So you give that as an example. When you talk to someone from a lower socioeconomic status, you have to do something like a gardening analogy. So you can say that, you know that you can have this grafting in plants. So you take the top part of a plant, I think it's called cyanide, and then you can graft that to a lower part of another plant. It's called rootstock. So when you do that, your plant can produce much more flowers, much more fruits compared to before you grafting. We can do that with our gene now in the baby in the gut. So you say that, so they can get that, right? Because their knowledge level is given. At this point, I should emphasize that knowledge, ability, and intelligence are not the same thing. Don't ever think that people from a high socioeconomic status are more intelligent than on lower segments. Knowledge and intelligence are not the same thing. Knowledge is the accumulation of facts and information, what we know. Intelligence is your rate of learning when you encounter new things. So knowledge is what you know, intelligence is how fast you can learn. So people from lower socioeconomic status can be very intelligent. They can get things very quickly. One might be quicker than people from the urban area, as long as we can get the right examples or explanation. Okay? Now, so the next thing that you can think about is how to structure your message. So after you get a sense of your audience, you want to think about how I can make my presentation much more structured. And structure is very important for human understanding and also human memory. Right? So you might have heard some psychological studies related to this. One of them is like a serial positioning effect, something like that. So which, if you give participants a list of items, they are more likely to remember the first item and the last item. They kind of forget what's in the middle. Right? So you want to think about that when you do science. Another one that I remember reading about, this is very fascinating, is about chess positional memory. So what scientists did, they split the participants into at least two groups. One is the chess expert, grandmasters. The second group is just amateur players. And then what they need to do, what the participants need to do is they need to look at a chessboard with chess pieces on it. And then the scientists will close it, and then the participants need to reproduce the position of the chess pieces on the board, their memory. In the first experiment, they take positions from historical games that have been played by grandmasters in the past, like Gary Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen. So in this first experiment, which one do you think will do better in terms of memory? Grandmasters or amateur?
Grandmasters.
Grandmasters, right? And so they got like a 93%, they get over 90% accuracy. The amateurs will just get like 50%. In the second experiment, they tried to make it much more challenging. Instead of using historical games, they give the participants chess positions that is random. Like you can never find the chess pieces to behave like this in the real chess game. In this case, who do you think will do better? The chess grandmasters or the amateurs?
Amateurs.
The answer is it's the same.
Ooh.
The chess grandmasters doesn't do better in terms of memory compared to the amateur. Why? What happened? Because chess grandmasters, they have simulated, integrated in themselves lots of concepts and principles in chess. So when you do the first experiment, you give them historical games, they will look at the board, they will look at the chess pieces and the logical structure related to that pieces. So they will say that, oh, the king is at the corner there because the player must have done castling to protect the king. Or the pawns is over there in the phalanx position. When you put pawns next to each other, when you put the phalanx position there because, oh, there's a structural weakness in the queen side of the board, so this player is trying to attack that side of the board. So they think like that. When they think like that, they understand the logical structure of it, they can remember the positions much better. The amateur doesn't have that much deeper understanding of chess, so they can't recognize the logical structure. But in the second experiment, when you remove the logical structure, the grandmasters, no matter how good they are, they're not being able to remember the chess position because the structure is not there. They just become like a normal human beings with rules aspects. So this can apply to your science presentation in two ways. Number one, when you try to arrange your bullet points, the things that you want to say, you want to arrange it in a way that makes logical sense to you. This is important when you do the science presentation to people outside of your group, and then you have a discussion with your supervisor. Your supervisor might say, I think it's much better if you put this point first, and this data. When you are in that situation, you can negotiate with your supervisor and say that, no, it makes more sense to me personally if I put this one first. If you can do that, you can make the points more logical to you, then you will rely less on the slides when you try to do science presentation, because it makes sense to you in your mind, right? And even when you have that memory, you can kind of play around during the presentation. You can move this, I think you should mention this one first. So that can only happen if you have your presentation structured in a way that makes sense to you. But it can't be all about you. The second point is you want to make sure that it makes sense to the audience in front of you, especially if the audience are non-scientists. Because as a science student, we're used to introduction, method, results, discussion. But when you want to talk to school students, people who are not in the specific sciences, you might need to consider, maybe I should give the results first. What's the result about this result? So I can get their attention. And they can pay attention. And then maybe we can talk about a bit of discussion. We can put the method at the very end, because they might not care about the methodology that I use to get these results. Right? So there's something that you can do. And another thing that you can consider is, okay, so let's think about this. How do you do that much more practically? So number one, you want to identify the core message of your presentation. What are the key takeaways that you want your audience to take away from this presentation? So I guess for the science communication, my core message would be something like, I want you to focus more on clarity and understanding. So you don't have to worry about impressing other people, you just try to be as clear as possible. The second point is I want you to remember that the goal of science communication is understanding. It doesn't have to be persuasion. Your audience doesn't have to agree with you, but if you can get them to understand your point of view, then it's a good science communication, right? And then what you do is you try to arrange that core message in a way that is logical, like I mentioned before, and you try to integrate a bit of repetition. So the common principle that people teach in basic presentation is you tell them what you want to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you have told them. You introduce your core message, and then you discuss the ideas surrounding the core message, and then you summarize about the core message. So that is something you can teach, something you can in the beginning. And the reason repetition is important is what's called Ebbinghaus's learning, Ebbinghaus's forgetting. So let's try to get that. So imagine that the y-axis is your retention. It's called retention, how much you remember. And the left one is time. When you encounter a new information for the first time, your memory will go like this. You hear it and then you can't remember it anymore. What happens is when you repeat something, when it gets here, you will go back here. That's not interesting. What interesting is the rate of decay of your retention becomes slower. It takes longer for you to forget the information. And then when you repeat that again, the third time, it becomes harder for you to forget the information. So that's why psychologists it encourages you to space repetition when you're studying, and you can also apply that principle to your presentation. You want to repeat, right? So you can remember. And another principle that you can use to help with your presentation is what we call cognitive load. So cognitive load is we can only process a limited amount of information at a time. Basically, right? Cognitive load is when you have a limitation in the amount of information you can process at a time. And there are many types of cognitive load. So the first one is called intrinsic cognitive load. The second one is called extraneous cognitive load. The third one is called germane cognitive load. So we just focus on the two. The first one is the intrinsic cognitive load. Intrinsic cognitive load occurs when you are presenting the difficult materials. So that first type of cognitive load, it is inherent in the materials. For example, if you want to talk about, if you want to introduce the organs, names, the names and function of the organs, that'll be much easier. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Right? But, so for that example, it will use lower cognitive load. Compare that with when you're trying to explain the names and functions and interactions of different immune cells in your body. That is a much higher cognitive load. Right? So the difficulty of the materials. When your material has lower cognitive load, what you can do is you can try to give the audience multiple facts at the same time. You can give them a higher amount of information. But when you realize that the thing that I'm trying to talk about is very complicated, especially for my audience, I need to reduce the amount of information I want to present to my audience. So for example, if you want to talk about how, you want to talk to a school audience, for example, how your body can actually protect your, how your body are protecting you from infections, you can talk about, we have multiple organs in our body that can help us to protect us against infection. For example, your skin, you know that your skin is actually a defense mechanism. It protects you from infection. You know what your tears, your saliva, your stomach acid can give much more information. But when it gets to the other part, we also have cells in our body that can help defend us. When you do that, you just reduce the amount of information. You don't tell every single cell. You just give like maybe two, for example. They say that we have something called macrophages. You know what they do? They eat the bacteria. And secondly, we have lymphocytes. You know what they do? They launch antibodies. That's it. You don't mention it together. Right? So that's how we play with the increased cognitive learning. The second type of cognitive load is extraneous cognitive load. This is the cognitive load that comes from the way the information is presented. This is something that you know well if you're a university student. University student, which is you can learn the same course from two different lecturers, but with one you find it really, really hard to understand. The other was so easy to understand. The materials is the same. So it's not the cognitive load that comes from the materials. It's come from the way the lectures present. So you need to be aware that sometimes you as a presenter can make the cognitive load to your audience much higher than it has to be. So sometimes it's good, I agree, I'm not looked at that. Sometimes it's good for you to increase the cognitive load because it increases engagement, increases engagement. But for the general purpose, what you want to do as a presenter is you try to simplify your information. Now, simplifying something is not the same thing as dumbing things down. You don't try to make things stupid. So dumbing things down assume that your audience doesn't have enough intelligence to understand your message, your core message. But simplifying things down, you assume that your audience doesn't have the knowledge that they need to understand your core message. Remember, we talked about the difference between knowledgeability and intelligence. So knowledgeability is how much information that you have, how much you know, and intelligence is how fast you can learn. So when you assume, the way I practice it is like this, when I look at a student or someone in the audience, I just assume I'm talking to a much younger version of me who doesn't have yet my experience and my knowledge, my scientific and my philosophical knowledge. So basically I'm looking at you and saying like, you're like a younger version of Irwan Hanish over there, and there's a distance between where you are and where I am today. My job as a science communicator is to create a bridge so that you can walk towards me and get the core message that I'm trying to convey. Right? And you can do that in many ways. So, I mentioned this now. So, what you can do is you can try to give them analogies or examples that are much more, that includes lots of imageries. So what I do in my immunology class usually, I give like an animal warfare analogy. So say, I want to explain to the audience, after you get infected, after being sick for a week or so, your body will fight infection in one of two ways: cell-mediated response and antibody-mediated response. How many of you actually let's check. How many of you actually remember the difference between the two? Hopefully most of you don't. All right, so I assume that most of you don't, which is good. So we can test whether this works. So how do you simplify that? The way you do that is you can give a naval warfare analogy. For example, you can say, after we get infected, after we get sick for about a week, our body will fight infection in one of two ways. One is cell-mediated response, the other one is antibody-mediated response. In cell-mediated response, our body will fight with a small combat ship. The ship has to come close to the enemy and then fight it. With the antibody-mediated response, our body will fight like an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier, they don't have to travel close to the enemy. They just launch combat drones, for example. So your B cell will launch antibodies to attack your infection. So that's one way you can do that. And then you do real-time audience analysis is when that analogy lands on mark. You can also find other examples, and you can, especially when your audience has a smaller audience and they are younger, you can assume, for example, they have watched Marvel Cinematic Universe before, and you can do something that's more statistically closer to how you think of things. So you can go again, after we get infected, after a week or so, when we sick, our body will try to fight it using one of two strategies: cell-mediated response and antibody-mediated response. In cell-mediated response, our body will fight infection like Peter Parker, Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, he can fight in that range, but most of the time he'll come close to the opponent and he will do hand-to-hand combat. On the other hand, antibody-mediated response, they will fight like Kate Bishop, Hawkeye. So instead of fighting in person, they use high-tech arrows. So the high-tech arrows is like antibody that your cells use to fight infection with. Right? So you can play around with different analogies. So when you do that, you can also try to include narratives. You can try to include a story. There is a story. So before I allow Yasmin to continue our presentation, let's try to think about what we have done so far. So number one, when we do science communication, we try to put ourselves in a state of service. It's not about us, it's about broadening. And we focus on two things. Number one is clarity. Number two is understanding. And number three is there are multiple ways for us to address our audience. So we try to do audience analysis, and then we can try to structure our message to serve those needs of the audience. Okay? So later we can discuss about something else during the Q&A session. So I would like to invite, we so actually have Yasmin. She's actually the co-trainer of 3-minute thesis, so she knows what she's doing. She's coaching other people to do science lectures. So I'm very happy to have her here, and I'm eager to learn from her. Good, Yasmin? Before it's yours.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. I'm Dr. Yasmin. Thank you very much, Dr. Irwan, for inviting me along. And can the audience, at home, hear me? You may reply in the chat box. Yes, cool. Okay, so unlike Dr. Irwan, I think he's well equipped with, knowledge of communicating, all of that. But he will have to develop bridge for me to get to there. But I do think that with experience or what I have experienced before, I have become the person I am today, who apparently can coach people to speak and convey scientific knowledge. Right? So a little bit about my background. Right, so I'm like you guys. I didn't start with being a very good speaker or a very good writer. I didn't. Okay. But I was, or I still am, I'm the first child in my family. And you know how first child, you will always get this huge responsibility. And when your parents say you have to do that, you will have to do that. right? And you don't want to disappoint your parents. But then with the second child and the last child or the middle child, they don't really care about that. I mean, they do, I'm sorry, everyone's offended, but apparently first child care more. So when my mom or my dad says, okay, Yasmin, you have to do this, you have to be like that, then I will take it as my responsibility to be as so. Now going to school, I mean, as I entered school, my structure, I'm tall compared to my friends, right? Because of that, I've always been chosen to become a leader, a prefect, or whoever. Oh, Yasmin, you go ahead and present this and that. And like, the pressure. I mean, I'm sure if I were to call any one of you to come up to speak, you will be reluctant, right? I'm like you. I'm like you guys. But, right. Through these experiences, I've gained some tips and some surviving skills because I know, okay, I'm going to be. Well, sooner or later, they're going to choose me to do this, so I have to master it. And apparently, when I was doing my PhD, so like how I feel responsible to my parents, same goes with my supervisors, my teachers, whoever I look up towards, right? And then my supervisor said, Yasmin, there's a 3 competition. I think you should give it a try. And then I read, 3-minute pieces. Does this mean I have to write in 3 minutes, my whole pieces? Oh, I don't mind that. I mean, writing, no one's going to hear my voice. I'm not going to be in front, presenting. But then sooner after that, I learned that, I have to present. And that's where all the nerves come in, right? So I was coached. And then I remember telling my friends, I'm just going to do it. Winning is secondary, but as a first child, winning is you have to win. You don't want to disappoint people. Okay? But I did try my best and I learned a lot. And what I learned, because first I had to present at the faculty level. Faculty level, I was in the engineering faculty at the time, right? So when I presented in faculty level, most of the audience, right, would know what I'm talking about because they're from my field. Okay. So I did my script, in a way that this is how I think people will appreciate what I was going to say. Then we moved to the university level. Still, people who would understand what I was going to say. And then we moved to the national levels. So the reason why I moved up is because, they feel like I can do it. So I moved to the national level, representing UPM at that time. But then things changed when I represented Malaysia and Australia. So so I got the opportunity to represent Malaysia and Australia. What changed was the audience. Right? If I were to be too technical, so what was I doing? So I was doing a biosensor using optical fibers to detect dengue. Yes. So if I were to say this in a very technical way, not everyone's going to understand. Like if right now, if I say, I use optical fibers by hand, who knows what optical fibers are?
Yeah.
I was the same. My degree was in biomedical sciences, and I was being approached to do this research in optical fibers. I thought they were, we're going to do glasses? But no, that's not it. So optical fibers are basically like these tubes, really, really small tubes that can allow light to propagate. So we use this to sense viruses, simply like that. Okay? So with the Australian audience, they preferred something else. You don't want things to be too technical, but they do want you to tell what you're doing, but in a more genuine way. What do I mean by genuine? So if in Malaysia, like in a Malaysian audience, they would expect, oh, you're a PhD student, you will have to present data, being technical, this and that, right? Okay. But then with the Australian audience, they don't mind all that. All they want is to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. These two things. And how are they going to value from what you're going to say? So one of the key factors in effective presentation skill is your audience. Dr. Irwan has mentioned that countless of times, part of his repetition, he kept on saying, your target audience, who you're talking to, right, and all that, right? So audience play a role. Second key is speaker. You, me. Okay. The third is transform. I'll get to these three more specific. Okay, so in terms of audience, what do you have to know? You have to know who they are, what they are, what they're doing, when, as in how old they are, where, and most importantly, what. Why are they there to listen to you? Why did they come? Now, as a student, right, when you're presenting your research presentations to your supervisors, why do you think your supervisors are listening to you? And why? Pardon? They want to know your progress, that's correct. Okay, anyone else? It's because we have to, right? We have to grade you, right? But as you grow older, as you start working, people are not getting paid to hear you, right? So you have to be more convincing. So you have to be valuable to your audience. And in order for you to be valuable to your audience, you have to know who you're talking to. For example, as a researcher, you're going to pitch, or if you have a business, you're going to pitch for your startup, for investors. You have to know who you're talking to. Are you talking to someone technical? What are they looking for? Are they looking for a new idea? Are they looking to make more money? Are they looking, for a friend? These things you have to know. Audience play a big role. Then what is of value, which is relevance? Now, as a student, since most of you are students, the value of most of your presentations at this stage would be the information that you are trying to convey, right? For example, if it's your research, it will be data. If it's about, let's say if I give you an assignment in biology, it will be to see if you understand what has been thought, right? So most of the time, your speech will be more about informing. Okay. Now, when you inform to the audience, so you already know the things that you want to inform. What makes it not boring is how you inform it. Okay. And this also depends on the audience. For example, if I were to tell my child, who's a 4-year-old boy, okay, when you go home, you have to take dinner. I have to say it that way. He'll go, if I say, hey, you know what? I have this activity for it's so much fun, and then he'll be like interested in it. Okay, we'll do it after you have your dinner. Okay. You see how different the approach is, and this is something that you have to bear in mind. Like Dr. Irwan said just now, we're so stuck with a very structured way of delivering or presenting. Introduction, method, method results discussion, right? Nothing wrong with the structure, but how you make that interesting? How do you make it interesting? You have to personalize it, and that comes to the second key, which is the speaker, which is you. Why are you so special? You're here delivering what we're trying to say, right? Why am I here, for example? Well, I know I have the experience, and I know I want to share with you guys so that it will help you to be a better speaker. Okay. What do you have to offer that nobody else can? And why are you important to that? So, for example, we've just had a 3MT UPM level competition, right? And so congratulations, please, Will, for getting to just run it up. Okay. So think about this. I hope you don't mind me sharing about you, okay? Think about this. She has been she was not confident from the very beginning. She kept on saying, "Oh, I don't know if my work is this important. Is this what they want to hear? Oh, sorry, repeating that again and again and again." Which is not wrong, because all of us feel that way, right? Sometimes when we want to say something, why was like, do they don't want to know? Who wants to know multiple fiber sensors? But if you don't believe in yourself, no one's going to believe in you, right? So the speaker has to be confident, has to believe in what you want to say. They say fake it till you make it, but I don't really believe in faking things. So, for example, when I was doing my 3MP, someone suggested to me, "Oh, you know how to make your speech engaging? Maybe you should talk about you going to a hospital, seeing people, taking patients sick on the bed, gonna die anytime soon. Tell them how bad that scene was." And then I reflected, his idea, when I was like, I'm not that kind of person. It's gonna be so dramatic. I don't think I can pull it off. So I won't do it. Same while you're presenting. Figure out what's comfortable with you. If you're the funny guy, be funny. Add some jokes. If you're the very serious guy, it's just from A to B, then be that. But then find a way to make yourself engaging in how you are by being yourself. That's what it is. Okay. Yes. And the last key is transform. Another one said just now. The reason we present because of two things: to inform, to explain, and to be clear about what we're explaining, right? But in order for us to be engaging, we have to transform our audience as well. I'm not going to say we have to. It depends on your audience, right? Just now, we mentioned the difference between science communication and scientific communication. The actual difference between these two is the audience. Science communication, as how Dr. Irwan defined, is more of a generic audience who's not part of your field, is not an expert in your field. But scientific communication is where you can, get into the details and tell all this stuff. But to make your presentation impactful and so that people remember, you have to transform your audience, to change how they think, how they feel, and how they believe. Okay. I'm not preaching, to be like, I don't know, a dictator or anything, but like here in the sense to change is, for example, if you know something new, instead of just telling them, "Hey, here's the new thing," you should tell them, hey, I have something new to tell you, and it's going to benefit you. This is good. This is what it is. Fine. They'll be more interested. Okay? Now we're going to go a bit technical. When presenting, when we talk about presentation skills, it's not just about body language. The first thing that you need to pay attention to is your script. Okay? And to get a good script, you need to get a good idea of what is it that you want to say. And this is a roadmap that you can use on how to transform your audience. So for example, I got this from Phil Wagner, by the way. So you identify what they know, what does your audience, what does your audience know, believe, feel, and think before your speech. Okay. So for example, right now I'm going to talk to you about audience transformation roadmap, right? So what do they know? What do you guys know before my presentation? Okay, you know that presentations can be boring, right? That's what you know. What do you believe? You believe that presentation, what do you believe? Presentation is about informing. Right? You come out here, okay, my project is about this is what I did, this is what I got, and in a nutshell, this is what happened. The end. Okay. Right? What do you feel? How do you feel about presentations? Nervous? Hard? Okay. Difficult. So what do you do? Just wing it. Okay. Okay. So now after, what do I want? Oh no. No, I did. Okay, so after, right, you plan how do you want your audience, or what do you want your audience to do? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to believe? Or what do you want to do? Once you get that on this table, it should look something like this. That should look something like this, right? So after my presentation about this roadmap, I want you guys to aim to transform your audience with this roadmap. I want you guys to feel curious of how to use this roadmap. I want you to believe that this roadmap can help, right? And then I want you to know that there are 3 magic ingredients, which is what was it just now? Audience, speaker, and transform. Don't just inform, you have to transform your audience. Another word for transform would be persuasion, I guess, but we're not persuading someone to that extent just yet. It's just to create that spark in your audience's mind. Once you get this done, you can figure out how you're going to do it. So, most presentations are boring. Then you want them to know, okay, if that's the case, it's because you're just informing. You need to what instead? Transform. How do you do that? You write your strategies here. Believe. People say presentation providing information, but actually, roadmap can help in order for you to transform. How are you going to transform? So, for example, this one, right? A to inform, fail to personalize. So I can maybe start off with my presentation with someone presenting and the audience is speaking.
Right.
Right, that shows presentations can be boring if you're not engaging, and sometimes by just informing, you can engage. So that's how you start. So when you have all of that, then you already know, oh, so my presentation, the aim of it is this. I need to get used to this, but transform. And that's where you build your presentation around, like your script. Okay, so whenever you have a presentation, script is important.
Yeah.
Some people can just wing it, I cannot. Some people have the ability, which is great, but I don't. And how do I overcome it? I write a script first. Okay, then structure your presentation. Now, once you get the script done, another thing that can help you with your presentation is visual aids. What is visual aid? The slide, right? Or whatever, you can just bring your prototype, and it can be anything that helps your presentation. Now, bear in mind that it is an aid. It should not be your presentation, everything on there, and you're here and reading, structure your presentation, use visual aids. Repetition is your friend. No. People can just read your slides, right? And also, your visual aid should not distract your audience from what you are trying to deliver. So, for example, if you have something very complicated, here, let's say if I have a picture of, I don't know, something very complicated, are you going to look at the picture and figure out what is Dr. Yasmin showing us right now, or are you going to listen to what I'm going to say? Right? So it will become distraction. Okay? But to tell your audience, you can have a flow chart to help, right? And okay, for example, let's say if I have an optical fiber sensor, and I put the picture of the optical fiber sensor here, like very technical, and the diameter, and all these technical parts, and I'm telling it to you guys. Would you understand my picture? No. You can simplify it, right? Make it easier. And if you have too many things, there's this one principle where you need the right amount of white space for your audience to focus on what you have on your presentation slide. So you can't make it too crowded. Like, for example, I just put these. Is it easy for you guys to focus on them? Right? And then after visual aids, repetition is your friend, like Dr. Irwan said. When you structure your script, remember the idea that you want to convey. You should tell them from the beginning, discuss it, and at the end, summarize it again or remind them again. These are the 3 points. If you look at my lectures, that's what I do, right? So outline, blah, 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 blah. And then today we have learned. So that's the strategy. Like the 3MT script, we also summarize things that way. And in your delivery, in your speech, an impactful tip is to start with something that at the end, when you close it, you can relate it back to what you started. So it will be more coherent in that sense. Okay? So I think that's my goal. Hi. So I can't get too technical with it right now because we don't have much time. It's just 20 minutes. But But this is the overall idea that I want you guys to take home, which is when you want to deliver an effective presentation, the three keys will be the audience, you, and transforming. Okay? It's not just about throwing your idea out there. It's about showing how your idea can be valuable to your audience. Then they can go home, even if they don't get, oh, this the lowest concentration of this is this. The best part about this project is that even if they don't go home with all these small details, Janji will go home with, there was a girl who presented about his strand of light detecting virus. Even if it's just that, that's great. We've made an impression and they go home with something new, right? So I think that's it for the effective presentation skills. Should we save the Q&A for later or can we? Or we can. Okay, so if you have any questions on the presentation skills, we can ask in the next session. Okay?
We might take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Yeah.
Okay, so before I start the next part, we can have like a short break, like 5 minutes or so, so we can start again at 11:40. Okay? Thank you. Okay, so it's actually writing for science communication, but because of space, no, I just forgot the word. Okay, so it's writing for science communication, right? Now, when it comes to writing, the concept is still similarly the same as you giving a speech, but the way of you doing it is different. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about my background in writing. We are so used to being told how to write. Ever since we're young, ever since school days, right? We've been told to, this is how you're supposed to write. Past tense, present tense, subject, predicate. That's how you're supposed to write. Right? I remember my mom buying me all these grammar books so that I can improve my grammar. Okay. And my dad is a journalist for NSUP. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he used to be, now he's retired, he has retired. And I remember, so one of the things that he kept on telling us is that, you know, when he was younger, his dad would always ask him to read so that you can improve. One of the most famous magazines at that time was Reader's Digest, right? Yeah, so that was how he improved his English. So he was trying to tell me at the time, you should read more too, read newspapers. I was 10. Newspapers were boring, right? It's some of the comic parts. I mean, at that time, you know, what's playing on channel 1, channel 2, channel 3. Now we don't have that anymore. But yeah, so he said that. So he gave me an assignment. I remember he said, read this article and then write what you understand about it. Okay. I was 10, okay. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I read and then started writing. That time, I didn't know all these tips. And then I thought, okay, he just wants to see if I understand what I read, right? So I just wrote everything down. And he read it and he said, why do you keep on going around the bush? you said it, you said this point here, and then you kept on saying it again, and then you kept on saying it again here and there, and everything is not coherent. And then I was like, oh. Well, he's a journalist, so, you know, and if you read how a journalist writes, it's always from point A to point B. Okay, so it's like, today, something happened, casualties, blah, 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 like that. Very dry. Sorry, but yes, very dry. Okay. So, at that age, I didn't really understand what he meant. Every single detail was important to me, right? Right? That's what we think. That's how we actually still think. Now, when we present, when we write something, when we write our manuscript, or when we write grant proposals, as a scientist who are very, very excited with what we do, we want to put every single thing down. Okay, so which is not wrong, okay, but it can get really easily bad if that's the thinking of it. Okay, so where's my story just now? Right, so my dad said that, right, and then we moved to the States for a couple of years, and I was like 10 or 11 at that time, so I had the impression, right, all of these Americans, they're the native speakers. They're really good at English. Like I can't be speaking. I am going to supermarket. You know, I have to have some slang accent, right? So I had that impression. But where I went was New York, and the white people were like minority there. In New York, you have all kinds of people in New York, right? Especially especially those who work in embassy, you know, we have all these different kinds of people there. And the Americans, their spelling was bad, their grammar was bad. All of that, and I learned at school that my mom kept on drilling me to do all the grammar books, didn't matter to them. It didn't. And you know the exercise that they do at that time? Instead of us, they will go he blank is supposed to write is or are, playing blah blah blah, right? That's what we usually do in standard school. That's not what they do. Instead, they will read something. And then the question will be, which is your favorite character? What color will you use to describe your character? So it's more of that. Okay, so they have been taught from young to use language, maybe not in the most correct way, but rather to convey what they feel, what they think, and how. And I guess it's very subjective, right? And so with writing, it's something similar to that as well. Okay, let's see what's first slide. So that's me. Right. So this is us. Okay. Now we're at this level where we're supposed to be expert writers, not because we're expert at writing, but because we have knowledge. We are an expert in a certain kind of knowledge. Okay, like for example, us lecturers, right? Immunology, biosensor. So we are known as expert writers. Now with expert writers, sorry.
You can put this on.
Oh, yeah. So with expert writers, when we write, it's actually a way of us to think. Like Irwan said, when he thinks he needs to write, or when his wife thinks he needs to right? She's talk about it. Us. Well, we will gossiping like, hey, you know, why this and this thing, why that? Some people they need to write on Instagram, netizens, right? We should not be like this. What's wrong with Malaysia? You know, right? That's where we are now. We're no longer writing to show we know something. We're writing because it's a way of us thinking. Now, with expert writers, so we think about the world, right? Through writing. But the thing about scientists is we're so enthusiastic, right, about what we know about our field, that we want to write every single thing under the sun. That we forget who are we writing for. So sometimes you can tell if you're reading a journal, right? You're reading a journal, and while you're reading it, you stumble. 80% of it might not understand. 80%. Okay. It's nothing. It doesn't reflect your intelligence or anything. It's just because these writers, when they write, they think about themselves. Right? They think about, oh, I want to write it this way. This is what I found, what I've discovered. People need to know this. They don't think about the readers, and that is why there is this disconnect between these two. And what happens when the readers are not engaged with what they write? What happens to you guys when you read a journal that you don't understand? No citation. Okay. They're gonna lose one citation. Okay, good. So most likely you're gonna stop. But before you stop, us students, us as academicians, we want to understand God within me, right? So we will read it again and again and again. We will slow down and go word by word, underlining it. What is this? And then towards the end, I gave up. Right? So we don't want that to happen with our writing. Now, with scientific writing, like for example, for journals and manuscripts, we think that data matters. It does. It really does. But now I can see there's a shift in how these papers are being written. They're more creative nowadays in the sense of the language that they use. And if you compare a journal written in 1980 and now like a nature journal, the language they use is different. Nature with manuscripts in nature, they're usually more relaxed, and that is the aim of the journal. Okay. So we need to know who our readers are when we are writing. Okay, especially when we have started working. Right now, when you're a student, whatever you write, we will have to read it. And we really try, we really try to read it. Yes, but then when you start working, when you're like me and when we publish our papers or we want to get it published, it keeps on getting rejected again and again and again. It's because we are not paying attention to who our readers are. And if you're looking at publishing into a journal, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is, which journal am I sending it to, and what are they looking for? Like I said just now, for nature, the way they prefer their language to be is a bit more relaxed, layman terms, but not that like a big, but it's not too technical in the sense that you can go ahead and read and compare. Okay, but these things matter. Sometimes when you're a student, I just want to get this published. I want to get this published. Which journal are you going to get it published? Oh, I don't know. Does it even matter? It does. What kind of audience you want to reach out to? That's good. When you're writing something for like a newspaper, I'm not gonna put every single thing, your limit detection, your concentration, or whatever. The readers in the newspaper will be like, Okay, next. Alright. So we have to know who your readers are. Okay? In your writing should be clear. Your writing should be understandable. But most of all, your writing should be valuable. So like presenting that to your audience. I know my handwriting is very marvelous. but like presenting just now, you need to know your audience kind and you have to create some kind of value. This is the same as well. Okay. Right. So this was the one that I stated just wrong. It has to be clear. It has to be coherent as well. Okay. That's another thing. Coherence. You have to structure it in a way that it is a flow. Okay. And you have to start with something that. Okay. So remember I said just now it has to be valuable. How do you create value? How do you create value in your writing? How do you show in your writing that it's important for people to read? Any ideas? Good, making it relatable. Okay? How do you make it relatable? Like Dr. Irwan said just now, he used Marvel, Hogwarts, and Harry Potter to make it relatable to his audience, right? But in this sense, one way to make it relatable is to start your scientific writing with a problem. If you can't find a problem, you create a problem. Okay, I mean, this is one of the tips. For example, if you're writing for a grant proposal and you're doing something like a sensor, you as a scientist, you appreciate the novelty of the sensor, blah, 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 blah. But other people want to know how your sensor can solve a particular problem. So you have to think of things that way. So what problem am I solving? If you're pitching, if you're pitching for an investor, right? If you have a startup, that's where you start. The problem. And that problem statement is very important. It has to be written in a way that is simple, has to be written in a way where people can understand and can relate to. So usually whenever someone comes to me to check their writing, I will always emphasize you have to focus on your problem first. Only then, when they read, oh, this is the solution that she's giving us, then they can understand. Or else they won't know, they won't understand at all. Right? Okay. Second, how do you add value to your writing? You have to show to the audience why they need to read. Okay, so first that's the problem. Second, why is your solution or whatever you're offering is better or worse? So there has to be some kind of comparison in your writing. It can't just be data. No. Okay? I'm just going to give you tips. Yeah. And then towards the end, say if you've already stated your problem, it would be a nice way to conclude by repeating again, by using repetition, repeating again what your solution can do and how it has solved the initial problem at the very beginning. If you have to do a 5-minute pitch or a 1-minute pitch, that is how you construct the script. And if it's a writing, that is how you write as well in your manuscript, so people can appreciate that or read that. Okay? I think that's it. Okay, so I have 2 examples here. They're very technical, because that's how I want it to be. But if you read the first one, I'll read it. And imagine yourself as someone who's going to give a grant to a project. So you have proposal A stating, as a consequence of the cause of sex, the theoretical probability of clonal and sexual coexistence is low. That's the example. Observation of coexistence in vertebrate taxa has been reported within the frozen niche variation model and parameter difference in blah, 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 blah. Okay? They've lost me somewhere here. Right? Why? Because they're just telling it to you. They don't show why you need to know. Okay? If you compare it with this one actually uses some keywords. For example, nonetheless meaning, oh, you're comparing this information with something, and it has been widely reported. So these are some of the keywords that you need to use in order to make your writing relevant. It's not just about informing, not just about telling people this is why. You have to show why. Can't be too technical now, trying to match time. But this would be just an introduction to how effective, I don't know, how to write for scientific, the science communication part. Okay. Yeah, so this is the last slide actually. I'm going to end it here for today for the science for the effective writing. But the take home here is you have to understand why you're writing in the first year. Okay? Sometimes students come to me, they give their writing, their thesis, for example, and it's all just about data. There's no personalization in that, you know, and you will lose engagement in the exercise. You have to consider yourself as the reader. Would you like to read something boring? No. But you don't make it interesting by putting 5 words as well, you know? So yeah, you need to figure out who you're writing it to, and then make yourself relevant, and hopefully you can get the engagement. Okay, so I think we're gonna open Q&A right now.
Just
Yeah.
what we can do is we can just sit it back here,
Okay.
and then we can have a conversation. Okay, so do we have any questions to start? Sure. One answer the question that we should answer the question.
Oh, okay.
So I guess so over the years, how do you think the way you speak or how the way you communicate science has changed since you were younger, since you were that age? What do you?
Oh, it definitely has changed, especially when I started to realize why I need to say the things that I want to say and what matters. So before this, like when I was 10 years old, I would write every single thing and then I would be criticized to be going around the bush. But now, after knowing, you know, not everything matters. And whenever people ask me, so should I write it this way, that way, that way, my principle will always be keep it concise and short, get it from A to B, but in an engaging way, and try to repeat it again and again, if that is your purpose for writing it, or if that's your main idea. So it's more clear now. There's this friend of mine who just had her PhD Bible the other day. Then she was telling me, she does social science. She was telling me, Yasmin, how do I open up my presentation? Can I talk about like why I'm doing this? How my mom has motivated me, blah blah blah. Okay. So I'm as from the science background, right? All of that, not that it doesn't matter, but like I'm sure it's very important for her. It's just that, you know, we want to get straight to the point, right? So I was telling her that I said, oh, in my field, well, I guess we don't appreciate that as much. But I'm not sure about social science. Apparently, her husband did the same thing, and then the whole room cried. So, yeah.
So they cried during a Bible
Yeah,
presentation. That's amazing.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. So then the audience matters. But yeah, so throughout the years, I think that was how it definitely has improved. And I think one of the ways is for you to identify who you're talking.
So my personal intuition about precise communication has also changed over the years. It becomes much more similar. So basically, when you were younger, you feel like you want to say as much as possible. As you get older, you feel like most of the time, most people don't care about most things that you want to say. So you just want to deliver the essence of what you're trying to communicate. So that's something that you will experience. So don't worry about, you start with the essence of the message, like I said, the core message, when you want to present something. And then you try to gauge the audience, whether they become more interested in your basic proposition, and then you can try to expand it. In terms of the difference between social science and science psychology, but I noticed that people from theologians and philosophers, they prefer to pay attention more to like the technical concepts and words. So when you present to people from humanities, it might be interesting to them to expand more about the concept that you're talking about. It's something that we, as a natural scientist, we don't really pay attention to. We don't really go word by word by word. What do you mean by this word? What do you mean by that word? What do you mean by that word? So we don't really do that. We just focus on the results and what are the implications of the results. That's something I noticed when I was speaking with the people from humanities and people from environmental sciences. What about people from engineering? Do you notice anything different?
With us?
Yeah, so when you study in engineering, do you feel the differences between the way students of engineers think compared to students from open?
The way they think, yes. So with our priority, with us, right? We usually like to, learn how things work first and then see its application. But with engineering students, they do it first, then they figure out why. Yes, so they look backwards. So they will go, okay, let's just try. Who cares? I mean, let's just not think about what's the principle behind it. We do it first. If it works, then we'll find the justification for it. So in a way, it saves time. In a way, it's quite risky. But at first, when I learned that, or when I was exposed to that method or that way of thinking, and I was a bit shocked myself, right? Because really kind of like, you have to understand what's happening and all. But it works sometimes, I would have to say. Anyway, it works. So in terms of if your target audience are engineers, then how it solves problem, how whatever you do, it gets applied as a solution, those things matter more than the concept of it working. Of course, you have to spend a little bit of time with that part, but then the whole application part matters more.
Your depth experience as a journalist has influenced the way you write. What about the way you speak? Do journalists have a different way of approaching public speaking compared to writing?
Okay, so in terms of public speaking, I won't say my dad is one of them. Because he can speak, but he's how do I say this? He's a quiet person. Yeah, so he's not the kind who goes, on stage and then speaking in different speeches. So that the in terms of giving speeches, I think that developed a lot of my experience like at school and then the things that I involve myself in and getting paid to present. Oh yes, we can do this. Oh yes, we can do this. Like, oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, sometimes we don't like it, right? But actually, it helps us improve. So don't look down on those opportunities. I'm not the kind who like, oh, we have to get ourselves involved in public speaking. Oh, I like. No, I'm not that kind. But yeah, appreciate all these opportunities. It will definitely help you to develop.
Yeah. There's something that I noticed over the years that there's a personality differences that people who prefer to speak more than write, and then people who prefer to write more than speak.
Which one do you prefer?
Writing.
Oh.
Yeah, so
But it speaks really well, right?
It comes from like it's something that you have to do. I feel like basically, if I have a choice between writing something or speaking about something, I'm going to choose writing about something. But because the nature of my job, and because the nature of my job requires me to speak, and the speak leads to speech. And the way I motivate myself to become better at speaking is just to try to think about a bigger picture. So not everyone likes to read. If I just focus on my writing and pay no attention to my speaking, then the change that I want to make in this life will become limited. I will just reach people who likes to read. And people who don't like to read, who prefer to listen, then I will use them. In fact, it's important for my marriage as well because my wife prefers to listen rather than to read what I write. So I remember, because I have this website and I write a lot on my websites, and sometimes I mention the things to her that I have written like years ago, and then she finds it very fascinating. And she's my wife, she's been around with me for years and years, and she never come across that idea that I mentioned to her. So what that means is there are a lot of ideas and experiences that I can share and benefit others that I will not be able to benefit other people unless I learn how to speak it. And that's how I think about it. Yeah. How many of you prefer writing and speaking? Writing and speaking? Or you prefer speaking and writing? Yeah, that's something interesting. What else do you want to talk about? What was you want to know? We're like 15 minutes or so. Yeah.
How to make an interesting analogy.
How to make an interesting analogy.
How to make an interesting analogy. I would say if you're already on that path of creating an analogy, whatever you come up with will most likely be interesting. Because you're already thinking of things that way. How to make it interesting, it depends on the audience again, right? Who's your audience? So if it's school kids, if your audience are school kids, then you have to find topics that are more relatable to them, or what they like, or what they value. If you're talking about, if you're going to deliver your speech to academicians, then your analogy has to be relatable to academicians. But a tinge of your personality in the analogy will definitely make things more impactful. For example, if you're funny and your analogy is funny, it reflects your personality, right? Then people will remember, oh, yes, she's the girl who's if you're not funny when you try to be funny, that can also leave an impression. But yes, again, be comfortable with what you're trying to say. If you're not comfortable with it, then scratch it. But a good analogy would be something relatable, simple, and yeah, like Dr. Irwan's analogy about aircrafts and warships.
I think it's hard for you to tell upfront which analogy will work, which one will not. So what you need to do is it comes from experience, you try multiple things. Like I said, I gave an example just now when I talked to those children. I thought the MCU example would get more excitement, and they just quiet, and then bring up the mentors, they become excited. And it also depends on your analogy has to be something that you can relate to yourself. So for example, I will not. So for example, I will avoid trying to give references and analogy about Star Wars, even if Star Wars has a big audience, but because it's something that you like Star Wars. So you should try and give analogies related to Star Wars. In my case, because I don't really want it, for some reason I don't get connected to it. So my analogy will not come from that. But when it can come from an MCU because I'm engaging. So your analogy has to be like something that comes from the inside, and it can show up through your body language, through your voice, that this is something interesting, right? And also depends on your audience, like Dr. Yasmin said. And when you are talking to like all the audience, you want the analogy or reference to be as generic as possible. So for example, if I talk to like a theologian, like all the professors, I will not bring Kate Bishop and Peter Parker. I will use something much more universal. I will say that, okay, after you get an infection, after a week, you're going to get your body will fight infection in one of two strategies. First, it is cell-mediated response. The second one is antibody-mediated response. So the cell-mediated response, they fight like swordsmen in the past. They take their courage, they go to the enemy, they will fight them hand to hand. But the antibody-mediated response will be like archers who will just sit on the hill and then try to shoot you from far. So that's how I give it. It's much more, it's similar to the Peter Parker and Kate Bishop because Kate Bishop also used arrows, but I don't give it like the stylistic aspect that comes from my interest. I make it much more generic. So that's how you can play around with narrative.
I think we have some questions on that.
That.
Oh, but it's
So itu yang soalan tugas pada yang sebelum pemanahan itu tadi. Answer. Okay. So the question for pemanahan is in a situation. So pemanahan is asking us in a situation, for example, during an interview, aside from being fluent in expressing what we want to say and being knowledgeable of the things that we want to try to speak out, do you have any other tips to make us memorable candidate during an interview? What do you think, Yasmin? It's specifically talking about an interview, like a job interview.
Many other tips to make this memorable candidate during an interview. Start by including knowledgeable. Yes. Know your audience.
Yes.
Right? You gotta know who's your interviewer, right? Yes.
Yes.
And you have to do research on them. See what they're looking for, see what they like, and how you can relate with them or how they can relate to you. So you can add some few things in your speech or in how you answer, but they will go, oh, this boy knows, this boy has done his research on that. And this guy is actually interested in the company, in working with us. You have to show the extra effort in order to make that impression. What do you think?
Yeah, so when you go into an interview, you're trying to apply for a position, a job interview, for example. What the company needs to find out is whether you are fit for the team. So what you want to emphasize during the interview is how much your experience and knowledge actually fit the role that you're applying for. So you can have multiple experiences. Most of them will not fit the job role, and some of them might fit the job role. So just focus on those few. And I think you don't want also to try to impress them because people can sense this, especially when they have experience, especially when they're an experienced interviewer. They know that you're trying to make yourself look better than you actually are. So what you do is you highlight that, oh, this is my strength that I think will fit the role that your company is offering. But this is some of the things that I might not be interested in about the role. And the thing about, I understand that this is like a kind of idealistic. When you try to find a role for a job, you want to find something, not just, you're trying to find something that fits you as well. So it's not just about you trying to fit what they're looking for, and you want to also find out whether the role fits your career ambition and your personality. Right? So one of the things that you can do during your interview is you can ask questions to the interviewer. So I read from the briefing that this is the role of the applying for. However, working after hours, for example, I prefer to not work after the office hours. Would that be a concern for your company? If they say that it's okay, we just as long as you finish your job on time, then we don't even want to bother you anymore. But some companies might be like, no, this is a startup. We need to work 24/7. We need to be available 24/7. Otherwise, we can't make the progress that we want. So then you find out that, oh, maybe this is not a job that I want to look for now. So that's how I think about it. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, yeah. And then Lisa asks, for a postgraduate presentation where the audience consists of both scientists specialized in my field and other fields, including students from different fields, which approach should I take when preparing my presentation? Should I focus more on the data and assume the other scientists are knowledgeable enough about my field, or should I lean more toward making it simpler and use more layman terms? Right? So you have to mix it.
Okay. Now, so it's a postgraduate presentation, which means you're expected to be technical. Okay, so that's one thing that you have to bear in mind, the kind of presentation that you're giving. So when you say make it simpler in more layman terms, there's a risk in that. Okay, when you making things easy to understand, like Dr. Irwan said just now, doesn't mean you're making it less complicated. I mean, no, doesn't mean you put less information in it. That's not what it means when you say it in the more simpler or layman terms, unless if your audience is more keen towards that. But now it's a postgraduate presentation, right? No matter from which field these people are, they are scientists and they are technical people. So they will appreciate your data. But then again, they won't appreciate your data if you present it in a way that they don't understand. So if you're gonna, I would say you can't lean towards either, but rather you have to be both, right? Those things that are complicated and technical, you have to find a way to say it in where your audience, in general, as in both your field and those who are not in your field, can appreciate. Sometimes to make it easier for them to understand, you can use analogies, you can use comparisons, things that they can relate to more, right? For example, let's say I'm going to talk about something that is very in the field of virology, but then there's someone in engineering who's there as well. So maybe I can chip in what's happening in the pandemic, COVID-19. Everyone's experiencing that, is still experiencing this now. So they can relate to that. I'm not making things simpler. I'm just giving more examples for all of your audiences to appreciate.
Yeah, so when you do presentation for a lab meeting, for example, it's not a binary between scientific communication and science communication. So it depends on the goal of the presentation. So during a lab meeting, for example, your goal is try to present all your data and try to get feedback, especially from supervisors, and so that they can see whether there's a blind spot. You forgot to do something that's important for data to be justifiable. So in that case, my recommendation is for you to lean more towards the technical, right? But so that will achieve the purpose of the science presentation or the lab meeting, which is you want to present all the data that you have found, and then you want the supervisors to see whether there's something else that you can work on. And so for the rest of the audience, even like your lab mates working on something else, what you can help them with is you don't start your presentation with the results. What you want to do is you give a background information about what is the hypothesis that you are trying to achieve. Okay? It doesn't have to be long, just to be clear that this is what I'm trying to do with my experiments. And this is the part of experiments that serve this objective. So usually when you give enough background to your lab mates, they can understand what you're trying to do. So I think that will be helpful. Right. And
what should I add? What should I add into my slide? Apart from figures and tables to make the slide less boring. From what I observed, scientific presentation slides are more straightforward and without any design.
Yeah. What do you use for your slide presentation?
Okay. I prefer something clean and minimalistic.
Yeah.
right? Like I said, there has to be enough white space for your audience to focus on what's on your slide. So whether it's boring or not, that actually depends on your delivery. Whether you're going to make it interesting or you're just not going to touch whatever you're showing, right? More designs on your slide doesn't make it more interesting sometimes. It can make it more crowded and people get distracted. But then a blank white slide, sometimes people like it that way, right? I mean, I like it as well. Just put your words in there. As long as it looks neat, clean, and straight to the point, or it plays a huge part in everything, then it should be. Yeah.
Well, psychologically speaking, we respond more to like images more than just words. Reason for that is because the word is a symbol, and then you have to interpret that symbol. There's a layer between the word and your understanding of what that word represents. But when you have images, it becomes much faster. The process is much faster. It takes less cognitive. So what you can do for your presentation, you don't have to put lots of design. What you need to do, you need to add more diagram. So instead of having a bullet point, you put like a diagram. This affects this. You put arrow there. And this affects this. You put arrow there. So that diagrams will help your presentation become more engaging.
Flowcharts, yeah.
Flowcharts, yes.
Yeah. Not the
Right. Right. You're welcome. One of the things that they mentioned in the form is they want to know how to overcome nervousness when doing presentation. Is that right? Right. So what is your approach? What is to tackle the nervousness when you do public speaking?
Okay, so I got this tip from one of my coaches. She said, to lose your nerves, pretend everyone in the audience is not wearing their shirt. Yeah. So then you'll be less scared and you'll feel like they're more weird than I am. So why should I be scared? So that whenever someone asks me that, I will always remember her advice. I don't do it. I don't want to. But I guess it may work with some people. I don't know. But what I do, practice. Practice definitely kicks off the nerves, especially when you have your script written and when you're well prepared. Of course, if you're gonna go wing it, then it's on you. It's for us, you're not too prepared. But if you're the guy who's like confident, then that's great. But if you're very nervous, then preparation and practice will definitely help. Like for my 3MT, I practiced so many times until my husband memorizes this. He was like, "Oh yeah, shouldn't you be saying this first?" Oh yes, yeah. So yeah, that really helps. And when you stumble upon something, right? Okay, so this is another thing. You get nervous because you're scared you're gonna make a mistake. Yeah, you're gonna make a mistake. But how Dr. Irwan said just now, when you have to be in this psychological space, and then you have to be a bit more forgiving to yourself in terms of you're gonna make a mistake, it's fine. That is something that you should bear in mind as well. If it's a mistake, so what? Right? Will people gonna remember me by this mistake? Yeah. So what? But the more you get nervous by the mistake, and the more you think about these mistakes that you haven't done yet, you will be more nervous. Another tip is to have someone familiar in the audience. So you just look at the one that you're familiar with, and this person will to encourage you, right? And you're like, yeah. So you won't be scared in that sense. That would be my tip. Oh, and another one is to look good when you're presenting. look good as in wear something presentable or wear something that represents you or you're comfortable in.
Yeah, that's something that came to my mind, like the psychology between like male presenters and female presenters is that both of us, we want to look well in front of the audience, but more often than not, the female presenters, you psychologically, you care more about how you look than we guys care about how we look on stage. So make sure during your preparation, you want to take care of that. You want to prepare what I want to wear in that presentation, whether I should wear these shoes, whether this color matches this color, like we guys don't really care about that much, so it won't bother us during the presentation. It doesn't make us nervous. So for you, female presenters, you want to pay attention to that so that when you're on the stage, it doesn't become a factor that you have to think at the back of your mind. Right? So that's one thing. And for the guys who care more about how we sound rather than how we look. So the downside of that is you over prepare or you try to overcomplicate things because guys. Because intelligence is like a comparative status between men. So when you try to speak in front of an audience, you tend to try to make things much more complicated than they have to be. So one aspect related to that is what's called the curse of knowledge. Have you heard that? The curse of knowledge. What happens then is once you become experienced of speaking or thinking about certain subjects, there are things that comes naturally to you that you think is a common sense to other people. There will be like scientific concepts related to biosensor that to her is something that she can talk about before she goes to sleep. But for the rest of us, we've never heard that before. So that is something that you want to pay attention to during your preparation. So you want to make sure that how do I explain this concept for people who have never heard of it, right? And related to nervousness as well, there are layers to it. So there are like physical layers, which is how you look on the stage, and there's physiological layers as well, which is the threat response that your body automatically gets into when you try to speak in front of to speak in a public, because this is explained as like the threat response by our ancestors. So basically, when you are in the middle and then your tribe doesn't like you, what that means is you're going to be rejected by your tribe, and then you're more likely to die. So our immune system, our nervous system, they are operating under that assumption that if these people don't like what I'm saying, I might die. Right? So that manifests in the activation of the amygdala, the limbic system, and it manifests as increased cortisol, increased epinephrine. So you feel your breathing becomes faster, and you feel like it's sweating because you become hotter. This is something that I experienced, and then your heart rate becomes increased. So right now my heart rate is, where is it? Yeah, 101. So my resting heart rate is maybe like 55 to 60. So that's high. So you have to accept the fact that your heart will pump faster. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just your body is preparing and is switching to an alert state, right? So when you accept that fact, when you experience the increased heart rate, when you feel like your throat is a little bit dry, you don't get panic. Like this is bad. This is bad. No, this is not bad. It's just part of your physiological response. So the way you deal with that also is by change your rate of breathing. Because when you're anxious, the part of your nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system will become activated. So this is the part of your nervous system where you are ready to like fight or flight, right? So the way you do that is you do the way I do it is it's called dynamic square breathing, okay, expanding square breathing. So this is a modified version that I learned from like a Navy SEAL, US military special forces. They do something called box breathing. So what I do is I imagine a square in front of me. So imagine that yeah. So you imagine a square. So imagine like a smaller square. Right? So what you do is you start with 3. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. What you do, you take a deep breath for 3 seconds. And then you hold it for 3 seconds. And then you exhale for 3 seconds. And you hold for 3 seconds, you breathe in for 3 seconds again. And then after you've done this a couple of times, you can increase it to 4 seconds. So this is expanding square. You start with 4, 4, 4, 4. Usually by the time you get to 5, what happens is you're slowing down your breathing. 3 seconds. And then 4 seconds. And into 5 seconds. Usually after 5 seconds, you can remain at 5 seconds. What happens there is you switch your attention from you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is related to rest and digest. And when you do that, you find yourself a little bit calm and less nervous during the presentation. But this is something that you usually do before the presentation, because when you're speaking, you can't just talk and suddenly so what you do in your presentation is you try to slow down, so you have space for breathing. Yeah. So another thing that happens when you are anxious is your mind goes blank, right? So in that case, what you can do is you practice one thing and make sure that the content of your presentation is logical. So even if you miss a place, your brain can go back to the place before it, and then you can go back again. Or worse comes to worse, you have like a note on your phone or something, or have notes on the side, and then you can just speak and then you lose a place, and then you can ask your audience. So, do you have any questions so far? No questions? Okay. My next point is in that, right? This is something you can try. Okay. All right. Is there any other questions? No? All right. So thank you, Yasmin. Thank you everyone for coming. So hopefully we can see each other again next time. Thank you.